Ladies and gentlemen, join me in the pledge to the flag, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. We'll call the Monday, August 20th West Fargo City Commission meeting to order. First order of business is to approve the order of the agenda.
Make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Simmons. Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Olson. It's been moved and seconded to approve the order of the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Approval of the minutes of August 6, 2018. Are there any additions and corrections? The minutes have been distributed for your review.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdevig. It's been moved. Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Olson. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the August 6, 2018 meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number D is the building permits. They have been presented to you for your review. Any questions or concerns? If not, the chair would entertain a motion, please.
I move we approve.
Been moved by Commissioner Olson. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Jurdevig. It's been moved and seconded to approve the building permits as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Consent agenda. There is one addition to the consent agenda. If you look at item number 10 on the regular agenda, which is a review of the liquor license application for Mackenzie River Pub and Grill, that is going to be moved to the consent agenda because what we're doing is setting forth a public hearing. So for the new liquor license for Mackenzie River Pub, and also there's a it was shorted on that description on item number 10 for Hooligans, an existing bar in the city of West Fargo, to move to another location in the city of West Fargo. So both of those, Mackenzie River Pub and Grill and Hooligans, have been moved to the consent agenda for to set up a public hearing for those two entities. So, Commissioners, what's your pleasure with regard to the consent agenda?
Move to approve with the revisions.
Thank you, Commissioner Thorstad. It's been moved. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Jurdevig. It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda with the addendum of item number 10 moving up for public hearing for Mackenzie River Pub and Hooligans. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Regular agenda. First item on the regular agenda is a special assessment community forum proposal. Eric Jurdevig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So over the last number of months, I've had many conversations with residents, specifically in regards to the topic of special assessments, and asking, when are we as a community going to jump into this conversation? They see Fargo forming a special assessment committee to look into improvements. They hear talk of eliminating them, which may or may not ever happen. And with that said, I believe, what works for one community may not be the exact right solution that works for another. So with that in mind, I'm putting forth the idea, to hold a series of community forums that West Fargo residents could choose to attend, where it would consist of a portion of time that would be, educational about how special assessments are managed and put together and so forth. And we, I think, include property tax into that conversation as well. And secondly, it would break into some, facilitator-led small group discussions to kind of brainstorm ideas, and then at the end, bring back those ideas and allow the city to really capture input from our residents. So not creating a committee of, 12 or 15 people, but really kind of opening it up. And, the idea would be to schedule a couple of these meetings and based off of attendance, if more were necessary, open it up further. And I think we could even go so far as to potentially look for some local businesses or organizations that might want to help support the minimal costs that would be associated with it in terms of, a hotel conference room, snacks, a facilitator, and so forth. So that would be the idea I'm kind of throwing out there as a way to engage our residents and gather some input from them on the improvements that they would like to see.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdevig. Other commissioners? Any comments on the proposal?
Well, I love the idea. During my campaign, going around the neighborhoods, special assessments and taxes were the main thing that everybody complained about, if you want to use that as a word. They don't understand how it works. They want to know how much I'm paying and all this kind of stuff. And like it was pointed out at the last commissioners meeting, what Tina, I'm going to use you as an example, pay for snow removal of your own driveway is less than fire protection for a whole year. So that needs to be explained to the general public. So I'm all in favor of it, Eric. Good idea.
Anyone else? As a point of, excuse me, Commissioner Thorson.
I concur. I think nothing else will, I won't say educate, but it'll relate to the public exactly what we're doing now, and certainly good ideas can always come from discussion, so I'd be supportive of that as well.
As a point of information, the city of Fargo has a commission, and they, I believe, last night approved the nominations for that. They actually took applications, and the city of West Fargo has a voice in the room, but not necessarily at the table. We're not a voting member. And Commissioner Grinberg, who is chairing that committee, and the Mayor Mahoney have both asked that I sit on that committee representing West Fargo as its ex-official, which I will be doing. I love the idea of what Eric has suggested. I know that he talked to me about this during the campaign, way back when. And so what will be, if this is acceptable to you as the presenter, Eric, we'll develop a community forum schedule and invite the necessary people, the key people within the city of West Fargo that have the knowledge, obviously city engineer Dustin Scott, finance Tina and or Aaron, as well as probably planning and zoning. I think that we'll also invite Mike Montplaisir to understand the property tax element of it, and the West Fargo School District. We're not going to have 16 members probably like Fargo, and the purpose of what Eric has shared with me is to have more of a community engagement rather than a very rigid appointed committee on their development and all their discussions. Ours will be, at the initial stage, will be more of a public taxpayer discussion with us as elected officials, and we'll take it from there. So look forward to that announcement, and we will invite the public if they want to be a part of this to engage in it. But we will set up a community forum. So the chair would entertain a motion to with regard to Commissioner Jurdevig's proposal.
I guess I would make that motion.
And moved by Commissioner Jurdevig for a special assessment community forum and engagement with the public. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Thorstad. It's been moved and seconded to develop a special assessment community forum. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next regular agenda item is the Red River Valley Fair annexation proposal. Commissioner Jurdevig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this topic is also related to special assessments. First, maybe before I get into that, I'll say that I have a fundamental belief that special assessments should be fair and they should be transparent. And what I mean by this is, generally speaking, two properties on the opposite side of the same street that might have the equivalent lot size should be assessed equally for the costs of rebuilding that street, generally speaking. I believe this is what our residents expect, and I believe it's what our residents think is happening today. There is one glaring exception to this rule, and that is the property that is thought of as the fairgrounds, and I would say that's also inclusive of Bonanzaville as well as the Cass County offices that are out there. These properties have West Fargo addresses. They are connected to West Fargo water and sewer. You can't get there without driving on West Fargo roads. But they are not legally part of West Fargo. This means that as a city, we have no legal authority to tax or assess them. Where this becomes a problem is in the example of the recent reconstruction of Main Avenue that happened a few years ago. These properties benefited greatly from that investment, but did not contribute to the cost. Well, Cass County did. They made an estimated payment for what their assessment would have been. What this means is that our west side property owners, the portion that would have been assessed to them was simply added on to the assessments of every other property owner in that assessment district, meaning that there are hundreds of property owners in West Fargo, residential and business, on the west side of town that are effectively subsidizing those organizations in terms of at least one way you could look at it. This goes against a belief I have in both fairness and transparency. I've had conversations with a handful of the businesses and residential property owners, and to date I haven't found a single one that understood that that is how it worked. These organizations are a part of the West Fargo community in every way possible, except for legally. And I believe it's time that we change that so that future assessments are applied fairly to the property owners that benefit from them. With that, I'll open it up to discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Jurdovic. Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one question, Eric. Do you have some documentation of those accusations that you're making? Do you have something that says the fairgrounds didn't pay anything?
This is through conversation with a number of people within the city. So,
because I don't recall happening.
I mean, I have gone out and looked at the property, right, on the Cass County site, and none of them fall into that assessment district.
But I was there at the time.
Okay.
When we did that. I was the street commissioner, and that's not how I recall it happening at all. So, and I don't know if someone, maybe Ryan.
Well, I mean, we could. I mean.
Yeah, I just want to make sure,
I've talked to Tina. I mean, I don't know, Tina, if you want to mention.
Eric had asked me the question about the special assessment districts, whether it's Main Avenue or some of the other ones in that area, and what I told him was that any property that's not within city limits, which would be the properties he's talking about, were not assessed and cannot legally be assessed. The county did make a payment, but that was for the county shop area that they own. There was no ability, we couldn't have forced them to pay us that either. They just did that because they felt it was the right thing to do. The other entities, no, they're outside of city limits, so we could not assess them.
Right, Tina, but what I recall, I'm just talking about that specific area, and I realize other areas are a little different, but I recall about when we did this, that county and the state worked something out before those prices even came to us, that the state actually paid for part of the county share of the fairgrounds. And that's why when it became that 80-20, it really wasn't 80-20. The state had picked up some of those fees. That's what I remember happening when we had meetings back then with Grant and stuff, Levi.
Yeah, I don't recall any of that. I just remember
you might want to
having
get a hold
a
of the county
discussion.
to ask the county, John, if they had some type of a contract there, because I think they did.
Yeah, we can.
Before we start, that's all I'm asking here. Before we start accusing people saying they didn't, I think I remember back there.
And I want to be clear. This isn't meant as me accusing. From the current legal structure, they weren't. This isn't accusing them of anything.
Right, I get,
they didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
But I believe that based off the information I have been told, and if something's inaccurate there, I agree. Let's dig into it more. But from what I have been told is that those assessments were effectively put onto every other person in that assessment district.
I just can't believe we would have done that. I know I would have known about that. And I don't think any of us up here would agree to that.
We can follow up on that. there was an agreement with the state of North Dakota regarding the cost share, so we'll follow up on that. From a pure legal standpoint, we cannot assess property that's outside our city limits. The Century Code provides a provision that when property is
I realize that, John, you don't have to go through it again, I get it, I understand that totally.
But there is a...
Sorry, but I'm just talking about this specific, let's find out about the specific contract here.
Yeah.
Okay, please.
We can do that, and just a little bit of information also, the Century Code does allow when property is annexed into the city, we can recover assessments for property when it should have been assessed and wasn't within city limits for benefits. So when you bring a property into the city, you can impose special assessments. There's a procedure set forth in the Century Code, and we have done that on other parcels when they've come into the city. There's a calculation you have to go through. There are some properties to the south that weren't included in the original annexations, and as those come in, we have levied assessments against those properties. So there is a process when property is anticipated to come into the city where we essentially defer the assessment, and then when it comes into the city, we can assess it. But we'll get back to you on that agreement regarding the state of North Dakota and the assessments for Main Ave.
Okay, so Mayor, one other quick question, and I'll let you go. I'm just curious. It's now let's just talk again about this individual property, okay? Because that's what we're talking about tonight. That's a nonprofit, correct? Is that wholly nonprofit? The entire
So, for example, the fairgrounds themselves, I think it's 140 acres. Brian would probably know better than I would, but that the fair buildings and so forth sit on. There's no property tax. This isn't a property tax issue in my mind. I do believe on the ag land that they own, they do pay property tax on that, although that wouldn't be a significant, I don't believe that would be a significant dollar amount difference if they were annexed into West Fargo. The issue that I have is around special assessments very specifically because I view these organizations as part of West Fargo. And from what I have been told, we are unable to annex them. I mean, take the Main Avenue example out of it. At any point, we cannot bring them into an assessment district, even when there is benefit to them for whatever project that is. And so and I think I want to get to the bottom of this, and maybe we table it for tonight specifically so that we can get the facts on the Main Avenue project. But from from my belief that the problem doesn't go away, even if somehow there was a misunderstanding there.
So, is this correct then? I'm sorry, Mayor. If we were to annex them and they were to come in, they're still responsible for special assessments, even though they wouldn't be. I'm thinking they wouldn't be anyway.
Well, so a couple of questions with that. The first one was that my understanding is the fairgrounds it's close to being a nonprofit in the sense, I don't know if legally they've incorporated as a nonprofit, but they are an entity that, all the money that they make essentially goes back into the fairgrounds. They're not a for-profit entity. And I think at the last time when we were considering annexing the fairgrounds, we were trying to work out an agreement with the fairgrounds, taking into account their limited ability to raise additional funds to pay special assessments. And obviously, it's a policy decision about whether to bring them in and assess it. But that was one of the considerations, and the draft agreement that was presented that I'd worked on with Matt Marshall took into account the fact that the fairgrounds has limited funds to pay for special assessments, and the agreement contemplated that property to the south of the fairgrounds that's currently being farmed would eventually be developed, and that would receive special assessments. So we had taken those sorts of issues into account when we put the draft annexation agreement together with the fairgrounds. And that's a policy decision that was being kind of explored at that time. And I don't know if Matt Marshall could explain more. He's not here, so. But
yeah.
And if you did bring them into the city absent any type of special agreement, they would be liable for any type of special assessment that would be levied against them. And there's only, in the Century Code, there's only a few entities that are exempt from special assessment: the federal government, the state. Cemeteries are assessed at a different rate because of their status as cemeteries.
Is Bonanzaville part of the fairgrounds?
I believe Bonanzaville is a separate
entity. Is a separate. Okay.
But that would still be part of the annexation, because it's right there, so.
Yep. It's outside of the city limits, technically.
Right, just like the fairgrounds, correct.
Is there any other discussion on item number 2? Mr. Jurdebag, I heard you say that you were fine with the possibility of tabling this until additional information can be brought forth with regard to
Yeah, I mean, I think Mark's
that Commissioner Simmons.
You know, I think that is the most present-day example I have of where I think the problem comes from. And so if there's a missing facts there, which I'm not sure there is or isn't, but let's dig into that and bring this back up in 2 weeks.
All right, what's the pleasure of the commission?
Mayor, I think before we do that, though, I think some people came here, I think we owe them an obligation to at least speak if they so desire.
This is not a public forum, so with all due respect, I am going to accept that. If someone would like to speak on behalf of Bonanzaville or the fairgrounds, but I'm going to ask you that you limit your comments to 5 minutes, please, because, like I said, this is not formally a public hearing or anything like that. So, is there anyone that would like to publicly comment on Mr. Jurdebag's proposal? Number 2. Ryan Schultz, manager of the Red River Valley Fair. Welcome.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity. We are a nonprofit. We are a 501c5, which is a nonprofit agricultural society. We also have a nonprofit 501c3 foundation that we also have part of the Red River Valley Fair. The land, I was just talking to Mr. Garris, who's our attorney, the land that we farm on the south side, we do pay taxes on that, and we don't have to, but we do pay them. The one thing I just want to throw out here is I served on that commission for two terms. And I think the way that Commissioner Jurdebag went about this was a little on the wrong side in my eyes. It would have been nice if you would have had an open meeting with our board and with Bonanzaville's board. I had an email from the commissioner to talk to me. We weren't able to make it, and then I saw this, then I got an email, and then I find out that it's on the agenda, that possible annexation. I think, going back in the time that I was on the commission, we worked it a lot different. We went out to the commission, to the people, and we talked to them instead of popping it up on the agenda. So I would hope in the future that if this is brought up again, that we do have some conversations with our board, with Bonanzaville's board. Brenda didn't even know that this was happening until I talked to her. So I think that some of the things that how it went about were not on the positive side.
If I may respond?
Sure.
So, yes, as soon as I put this on the agenda last week, I reached out to you, and actually I thought I had sent Brenda an email, and apparently I'm not sure what happened, and Brenda and I talked about that on Friday, and I apologize for that. As it relates to this commission, it is my belief that this commission's purpose is to come to conclusions and a quorum in the public's eye. This is my idea. So, coming out to you to have a conversation, I'm not sure what the end goal of that would be.
I think some of the questions that you're asking could have been answered prior to that.
Yeah, and I'm fairly comfortable as to the information that's there, and I look forward to, digging into that more. Could I have reached out a week or two earlier? I hadn't put it on the agenda yet. I suppose I could have, and that's reasonable feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, sir.
Tell me who this is again. John?
Yep.
Okay.
Mayor, John Lund, I'm the president of the board at Bonanzaville, and as a point of information, we are a 501c3 as well. Again, we were surprised by this motion. We only learned of this on Friday, so we have not provided any input to Commissioner Jurdebag. But I will tell you this about Bonanzaville. We would struggle financially if we were assessed. There's no question. We operate really on a shoestring. As some of you know, probably years past, Bonanzaville has lost money. I'm proud to say that we've kind of turned that corner, but again, we still operate on a shoestring budget. If we were to be annexed in and we're required to pay special assessments, we would probably have to reduce programming, and I don't think anybody would like to see that happen at Bonanzaville. Both organizations, the fair and Bonanzaville, provide economic benefit to the community. And with regard to fairness, there's always somebody on the other side of a border, isn't there? I mean, you know, if you keep moving the line, you're going to keep bumping into somebody else who benefits from your street. So I think, you know, what's fair is to consider these two organizations both as nonprofits, and what value they bring to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lund.
Brenda Warren, the Executive Director up in Annandale, and I just wanted to add, you know, we have so many visitors that come through West Fargo, and they spend a lot of money, and I can tell you that so far we've got all 50 states represented and over 40 different countries. And I just want to reiterate that, you know, when I took over, Bonanzaville was heavily in debt. We are now paying our bills, and we're doing fine. But we are on a shoestring budget, and we try to improve our village, and we're doing that by, you know, some buildings have been neglected for years, and we're improving that. There's just so many programs out there for the community and for the children. We have thousands of children that come through the whole month of May. So I hope you consider us and take it. You know, we'll open our books for you. You'll see that we have a very, very limited budget. This would devastate us. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Warren. Is there anyone else? Chair recognizes Frank Lensmeyer. Frank?
This is the first I heard of this, and I would hope if there's a pursuit by the commission and the citizens in our community of this annexation proposal, that it looks at all the possible benefits to the organizations that are involved as well as, and not just be a tax issue. Maybe this can be worked out so that it's help to these organizations that are, I feel, a great benefit to the West Fargo community. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lensmeyer. Anyone else? All right, we're going to close the public comments. Going back to the item number 2 of the regular agenda, what's the wishes of the commission?
Excuse me, Mayor, first, thank you for opening that up. I really appreciate it. I realize that was not total protocol. I would only make one recommendation, Eric, if you want to move forward, tabling this or whatever you want to do, is that in the meantime, at least we get together with Bonanzaville, and we get together with the fairgrounds, and probably even get somebody from the county. You know, that's county land right now. Get somebody from the county and sit down and let's have some conversations before this comes back to the commission. And then bring it back once those, you know, so we can get a little communication open here and see where we can end up with this. Does that sound fair?
We got lots of nodding heads up here.
I would make that motion to add to your motion, or however you want to do that.
I have one request. Can we not put a term or a time limit on it, like 2 weeks? I mean, absolutely. Unless we can, let's give ourselves time to gather the information, visit with all of the entities, and I don't think we should be pressed for a 2-week period.
My point in bringing this up was to start a conversation. I believe that, you know, there's an issue here that needs to be looked at, but it is certainly not something that needs to be solved in 2 weeks or a month. I will also say, you know, I am big fans of both organizations, and I can have all the empathy in the world for the financial position that this, you know, future tax or special assessments might put you in. I also have a lot of empathy for the special assessments that would be impacted by hundreds of other property owners, and I'm certain there are some sympathetic situations there as well, and people that would say that they can't afford it. So I believe that is something that has to be balanced out. Unfortunately, financial viability or financial health has never been a consideration to being handed a special assessment to anybody.
What's the pleasure?
You know, I would say we
just table it.
You know, table this and continue the conversation, and you know, first off, get some clarity to the Main Avenue Assessment District that was done recently. And I'm absolutely open to expanding the conversation.
And moved and seconded to table the item number 2, the Red River Valley Fair and annexation proposal. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Item number 3 is to review the CPM agreement for the West Fargo Urban Grant. Chris?
Mayor and Commissioners, this evening for you is the cost participation and maintenance agreement for the Urban Aid Grant Project on Cheyenne Street. This document's a fairly standard document anytime we receive federal funds through the DOT. It talks about what the project's capped at, what our matching percentage is, which is 19.17. It also talks about the design standards we have to meet, so it's fairly standard and straightforward. One item I did notice, actually, Larry Weil, when he was reviewing it, picked out on top of page 4. I contacted DOT and asked them to change this language, but it was saying we were prohibit double parking and diagonal parking within the project limits. Well, a large part of this project is diagonal parking, so that's one item we'll have to strike. So this evening what I'm asking you to do is approve the CPM agreement without item number 2 on top of page 4.
Would you share with the public the dollar amount of this grant?
The grant is $2.4 million, roughly $2,377,000, and we have a 20% match.
Thank you, Mr. Brungard. Any questions for Mr. Brungard?
I move we accept it.
Been moved by Commissioner Olson that we accept the CPM agreement for the West Fargo Urban Grant administered by the DOT. Is there a second, please?
Just clarification, does that include the adjustment as suggested by Chris?
Right, yeah.
As amended by
Yep.
Mr. Brungard.
I'll second that.
Second by Commissioner Thorstedt. It's been moved and seconded to accept the CPM agreement for the West Fargo Urban Grant. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Brungard. Number 4, first reading on the rezoning of the Wilds 11 addition. Mr. Solberg.
Thank you, Your Honor and Commissioners. I'm just going to pull up Wilds 11 for reference here. Thank you again. This application was received in order to accommodate platting additional residential lots in the Wilds development south of 52nd Avenue West. The applicant here had initially proposed 125 R1 zone lots and 48 R2 zone lots, but has since changed the R2 lots to R1 SM zoning with the exception of one of these lots that would be used for multiple family. In analysis of the plan, staff had just a couple items of concern. First, we're a little heavy on inventory of service lots in the community. At the time of application, we had 1,211 serviced residential lots, of which approximately 747 of those lots were of similar zoning of this proposal. As I've highlighted in the staff report, our rate of absorption for residential lots would indicate that this is adequate inventory for approximately 3 to 4 years in sort of a high permitting stable rate. In our leaner years, this would be adequate for much longer, potentially 6 years maybe. We are currently on pace for a good year for residential permits, so I feel like this is probably a good inventory for about 3 to 4 years. West Fargo 2.0 also strongly supports increasing commercial tax base, so I struggle somewhat to have such a heavy inventory of residential lots when we're trying to find ways to increase commercial tax base, which is shown to lessen the tax burden on the community. Second concerns, we have been monitoring connection to Horace with the Wilds development here. There's potential for a large amount of homes within this section south of 52nd, with really only one major corridor to get out, and that's 52nd Avenue. We've had agreements that have pointed to connection to 64th Avenue South, and we continue to talk with the City of Horace and actually had meetings recently as well. To date, there is no connection to 64th, and what we had previously identified as potential for gravel connection, we've noted may not be adequate in the future. All that being said, Planning Commission has reviewed the application, held a public hearing. The issue of inventory has felt something to be better addressed by the Commission with regard to their comfort level. Planning Commission was happy that the applicant is including a mix of housing types within the development, finding that consistent with the recently adopted comp plan. We recognize the benefits engineering-wise to finishing off some utility, street, and other infrastructure with the development. And they've reviewed the recent zoning change that was addressed at the public hearing last meeting, and found no issue. They're forwarding the recommendation for approval with conditions noted in the staff report, and just highlight that that point of inventory is an item for the commission to consider. With that, there is no public hearing scheduled tonight. That was held at the last meeting, but the applicant, I believe, is available, as am I, for any questions you may have.
Do you have any questions of Mr. Solberg or the applicant?
There we go, now I got it pulled up.
Just a comment, sir, if I may.
Yes, sir, Mr.
That's a fairly good-sized cul-de-sac with supposed to be a dead end, but it's gonna go through it looks like a minor housing development, similar to the Evergreens over here. And as you know, we had a lot of problems with traffic going through the Evergreens, cutting through, and unless we put some really large signs at the beginning of that drive that says, this is the dead end, you're not gonna get out the other end, I think that housing development, unless they put some kind of gate structure or whatever, is gonna have a lot of traffic cutting through there.
Commissioner Thorstad?
Maybe that's fine, maybe
Yeah,
that development won't care, but I know, the Evergreens, I think if you go down to one more picture, they show like, looks like 5 house units. And there's I would assume that's a private road through the middle there. But if you come down that cul-de-sac, not knowing that it doesn't continue down, you either have to turn around and go the other way, or you're gonna cut through that little housing development down there. And I don't know if you recall, Evergreens had a real challenge with that, and they ended up putting out the gates, so they didn't have people cutting through. I just want to have our eyes wide open going into it, that's gonna be a problem if they don't have a solution for it at the front end.
Our current requirements for a cul-de-sac would be greater than, I think, 550 feet. It requires review from fire, public works, and police. Beyond that, we think that there should be a secondary connection. So what we had anticipated requiring with this is that this be an actual easement of access, so they couldn't close it off. This development would be more like a multiple family development, and so we would require a certain width to have that access available for emergency services, as well as if somebody did do a cut through, it wouldn't be a comfortable cut through, but they could cut through there. The cul-de-sac circumference as well is required to be a certain amount for a turnaround of a fire truck, so that was mainly fire and police's concern there. So if this isn't if you're not feeling that this is acceptable to do this easement through here, then I'd encourage the planning, or the city commission to require that road actually connect through there rather than just an easement, and that they reconfigure the development of that lot.
Well, my concerns could be whoever owns that property there, are they gonna be complaining because people are cutting through there? It's gonna be a shortcut. If you got a house down on that end, I can see people cutting enough to get to it. Or vice versa, you know, you get down there and say, oh, I gotta turn around and go back out, or I just cut right on through there. As long as whoever owns that property, most properties don't mind cars cutting through there.
Well,
I'm sure it's gonna happen.
Yeah, I mean, we almost are expecting it to happen by requiring an access easement. If that's not acceptable to the developer or the commission, then if we feel like it may cause some problems, we could certainly require them to redesign that lot.
Well, I think if it's designed properly, you know, if they can put a little skinny street in there and they can put a lot of housing units in there, that could be a problem if you have children or whatever running around.
If I could just correct myself with Dustin here, our requirement for a minimum width would be 22 feet without parking. I would think of it similar to what's up by Strawberry Fields. The same developer has a townhome style development. They actually put in, I believe, a 40-foot roadway. And that 40-foot roadway is an access easement that people actually use as a roadway. We're not improving it. Almost you want to maybe think about what Family Fair has in front of their building, Menards, where for all intents and purposes it's designed to handle traffic.
Okay. Well, that's fine. I just want to have our eyes wide open going into it, because I can guarantee you that there are people, unless they know that's going to happen, there are going to be complaints about people cutting through there. Particularly if there's any speed to it.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and if it is a problem, now's our time to catch it. We wouldn't be able to deal with it later because it will be a public.
Well, it could be a design thing. When you design to make sure the road is able to handle more than a car meandering through parked cars and boys or whatever else are sitting out on the road there.
Yeah.
Those are like townhomes possibly down in that one corner?
Yeah, well, the way that this is proposed is simply an R2 lot. They can design any type of R2 type structure, so it could be under 8 units is permitted by right. So there's no real requirement of what kind of building, but the developer has said it would be similar to what they have built in Fargo, north of 36th Avenue. It's kind of a big house look to it is what it's considered. 7 units, each one with its own separate entrance, but it's like a nicer looking multifamily residential structure.
Sure.
I too am very concerned about the 22-foot width. You know, garbage is gonna have to have garbage trucks and all the service vehicles that have to go in there. I'm very concerned about that, nominal width.
Tonight is the proposed first reading. We could ask the developer to take a closer look at that. When we do the final plat review, the easement would have to be on that plat. So that design would have had to have been thought out prior to putting that easement on the plat. Would you say, Your Honor, if you want to provide that as a recommendation moving forward from the second?
I certainly would.
And the developer is here. I don't know if you want to speak to this.
Any questions of the developer from any of you? Commissioners? All right. Please.
Your Honor, my name is Jim Willis. I'm here on behalf of the developer. Maybe just to address the Commission's concern. It is my intention to build those 7 plexes, and the lot was designed for them. Ones we just have north of 36th. The 20, like I said, I don't really care what the road width is, but we know full well this is going to carry a lot of traffic out of that cul-de-sac. I mean, that's the plan. For sure. And that's why I guess I don't know how big the streets are in Shadowwood, but I don't think these are a whole lot smaller than 22 feet. But if someone's got a better number in mind than 22, and we're certainly open to it.
Thank you. Yes,
I just want to, this isn't the time, but I just want to add this. You know, this is when Eric is talking about special assessments and stuff. This is when it comes into play, because the bigger the streets, the more it costs, the less affordable it is. So when we're talking about all this, we want to keep this in mind, that if you want, not that I agree with this, but I'm saying if you want affordable housing, you want to get special assessments done, as of now, this is really the only way that I've come to see that we can do it. Again, I'm not saying it's a great deal. I definitely want wider streets. I'm just bringing up the fact that this is what we all have to keep in mind when we talk about special assessments.
And typically when we do these type of town developments, we don't allow parking in the street. And we've got adequate parking off of the roadway so that we're not having to build 1 or 2 lanes of parking along with the traffic. So.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions from Mr. Bullis?
Question for Tim. By saying this is an easement access, can you define that? What an easement
Yeah, so we often do this in the city of West Fargo. We're not too scared of private easements. We've gotten pretty good at how we handle it in our developer agreements with the help of years of experience of Larry and expertise of John and our collective brains of engineering and public works. We require typically a 40-foot wide access and utility easement. So within that, we handle sewer, water, and we keep that as a city-owned sewer and water. We make them maintain any appurtenances, et cetera, so if they damage a manhole cover, they got to fix it. We make them pay for the streets and maintain the streets as well. But we keep an access, a public access easement on top of that street so that the public can use that street. Typically do 40 feet because we kind of want to at least get around 24 foot wide for a parking, or for a street that doesn't have parking on either side. If we want to do parking on either side, we've gone up to 60, even 80 feet sometimes.
Well, it's kind of like a private road, but we still have easement to...
Yep, it's 100% a private road. They pay for it and everything. We just make sure that our sewer and water underneath it is ours, and typically we pay for that in an improvement district.
Thanks, Tim.
Any other questions, Mr. Solberg? Just take the comments from the commission under advisement, Tim, and I look forward to you coming back with this one.
If the commission so pleases, the first reading is scheduled tonight as well, so that we need a motion for that.
Make a motion on that, right?
Yep.
So move.
Been moved that, first reading of the rezoning of the Wilds 11th edition as presented by Planning and Zoning and Mr. Solberg. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that the first reading of the rezoning of the Wilds 11th edition. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Solberg. Second reading on the zoning ordinance amendment to section 4-421 of the A Agricultural Zoning District Regulations. Mr. Solberg.
Thank you, Your Honor. There's been no changes since the first reading. I included all the previous information for your reference in the staff report, or in the packet. And also John has put together what would be a proposed deed restriction form that we would use to consider if a plat were to be coming to the body or to the commission. So with that, I'm available for any questions, and John's worked also a lot on this as well. So
Questions, Mr. Solberg? It's a pleasure of the commission.
Make a motion, put it on second reading.
Been moved to put zoning ordinance amendment to section 4-421 on second reading.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Simmons. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Solberg. Number 6, review the JB subdivision, a subdivision and conditional use permit to allow for single-family dwelling in an agriculturally zoned district. Mr. Solberg.
thank you, Your Honor, Commission. This application was received simply to accommodate the splitting of a lot and was the impetus for the previous zoning district amendment that we just reviewed. The size of the lot correlates to the proposed amendment just considered, and you'll note that this lot is about 3 acres. They would deed restrict that surrounding 40 acres, quarter section. And that form would be in the form that we just used in the last item. Proposed subdivision here is outside of the current alignment of the FM diversion by about a half a mile. We did send notice to the county, Cass County Water Resource Districts, and we also reviewed preliminary flood maps to determine the elevations in the area and the road which will be used to access the property. Property here is relatively high. It's in a good area of the section. The applicant should have no issue with their 3-acre lot meeting the city's floodplain development requirements to construct 2.5 feet above the base flood elevation. We also believe the road is accessible at times of spring flooding. The preliminary flood map shows that that road is out of the floodplain. Staff believes that there's a limit to what the city can restrict with regard to utilizing one's property. We believe that the previous amendment reduces development pressure while still allowing reasonable use of a person's property consistent with a comprehensive plan. At the July 10th, 2018 meeting, the Planning Commission agreed and is hereby forwarding their recommendation for approval with conditions noted in the staff report. I'm available for any questions, as is the applicant.
Any questions, Mr. Solberg? Would you state again, is it out of the floodplain?
It is within what previously was Zone A, which was undetermined floodplain. The preliminary map shows it as a Zone AE, which is in the floodplain. However, there's a determined elevation which they can elevate the property to. They have 3 acres of property, and they can build their property, their actual house, above the floodplain without having adverse impact to the downstream neighbors by the amount of land that they have. If there was more increased development in this section, I'd have a real hard time with it.
With that being said, can they have a basement?
They can if they do basement floodproofing through the city's floodplain development ordinance.
And they're well aware of all of that?
Yes, they are.
Any other discussion? Questions from Mr. Solberg? It's a pleasure of the commission.
Make a motion to approve with the 9 recommendations.
And move to approve the review of JB subdivision. Is there a second, please? Second by Commissioner Olson. Been moved and seconded to review the subdivision and conditional use permit to allow for a single-family dwelling on an agriculturally zoned district. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item number 7. Review of development at 425 32nd Avenue West. Mr. Sobert.
Thank you, Your Honor. I placed a memo in your packet tonight. We have what's called the Corridor Overlay District along many of our corridors, and this includes 32nd Avenue. You'll note in the first paragraph of that memo, I refer to building construction standards, which require that 70% of the property's wall facade should be fronted, which front on a public street shall be constructed of glass, brick, wood, stone, architectural concrete cast in place, or precast concrete panels, or, as approved by the Commission, other integrated materials per the architectural design. The Dollar General is proposing to build at 425 32nd Avenue West. They proposed first to have the side faced primarily with metal panel, and we sent that back to them, said that wouldn't be acceptable. They then supplied a plan set that had hardy plank lap siding. Hardy plank is like a sort of a cementous product used typically in residential settings, and we didn't feel comfortable that we could approve that, so we brought it forward to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission reviewed it, and the Dollar General has come back with some articulation and some included features within there to create somewhat of an architectural design instead of just putting the lap siding on there. And so we're bringing it to you tonight to see if you accept it. If so, I'd look for a motion approving in materials meet this requirement as other integrated materials per the architectural design. Member of Dollar General's development team here was at the Planning Commission meeting, but I don't think they could make it tonight. I'm available for any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Sobert?
Tim, exactly where is this going again?
This would be west of Cheyenne Crossing.
Just
or Eagle Run Crossing, I'm sorry. The gas station on the corner of 32nd and Cheyenne.
So very close to our lights on 32nd project.
Right across the street.
Right across the street. So I just want to remind the commission, and I know, Mayor, you talked about it, I still haven't seen it. There's a letter out there from those developers, and they're doing multi-million dollars into that whole facility. And I just want to make sure that we're keeping everybody to the same standards so that that whole area looks nice and it's done to the same, nobody's getting any, I guess, special treatment out there. I want to make sure that that's our investment as a city as well and our vision. So I'll make sure, Tim, when you're looking at it, that you take that into huge consideration when you know, I can't tell by looking at this chart what this building's going to look like. We never can.
With the rest of the development that's going to go around there, to stick a Dollar General.
Well, that's what I'm concerned about. I want to make sure that
exactly.
I want to make sure, you know, we have a lot invested in that area, and I want to make sure that it's right. And I don't know that, again, I can't tell by these pictures anything. We hardly can. Somehow we need to get a better.
Was a physical sample of the materials provided to the planning and zoning or to you, Tim?
No, it wasn't. Just simply the photo which I provided in your packet there, this proposed palette of colors. That was a picture that they took and sent to me.
Yeah, that really doesn't tell me much just looking at that. I mean, do they have could we ask them for some 3D pictures or something? I guess I'm just concerned. You know that we want to make that, we don't want to mess up on that one. We want to make sure that what we put there should be there.
Commissioner Thorsten.
And off Commissioner Simmons' comments, that lower right, I assume, is the east elevation, and that looks like just metal. If I know Commissioner Simmons will recall, but when the schools put up their hockey arena, they had proposed something similar, just a plain metal on the west, and they had to incur additional expense, and it was the wish of the commission and the planning and zoning that they do something that's more aesthetically pleasing for that area. And I'd say right away, I wouldn't go with that with just a plain metal on the east side. They want visually, at least on the driving.
And the school district gracefully did that. I mean, they were very good about an understanding, as you recall.
And the schools came back with a good plan that didn't kill them, but it was certainly a lot more aesthetically pleasing. And looks like they're economizing, to be quite frankly. And I'd like to see them put a little bit more effort into making it a nicer looking property at that point.
I'm hesitant to. The school district was gracious to do some of the things that they did because of the way our ordinance is written. It's sometimes difficult to require certain things And so I think what they're following is the written law of the ordinance. The problem I have sometimes is, an applicant may not be as invested in the community that they want to make sure that it's going to be lasting like that. Because if you look at the ordinance, I point out on the first paragraph, one of the potentials that they could use is wood. So a person could use wood siding, which would be even worse than what they're proposing. So I think what we could ask them to do is give a little bit of thought to, like you said, maybe the 3D rendering so we could see how it's going to look, and so that then maybe they could also see how it's going to look and maybe work with them that way. It's difficult because sometimes, like I said, the ordinance is written a certain way, and legally they are able to do that metal on that side because it's not fronting a public street, so it's a little difficult. But just...
I guess at the end of the day, Tim, though, we approve it or disapprove it based upon what the commission thinks, correct?
I'll defer to the city
For that to our attorney? I guess if it's
I kind of looked over at him.
I think we're going over, I mean, that's our decision. Yeah. I think it is. We're the...
So if the real question is, if they meet all the requirements of the zoning code, they're approved by right. You don't need approval from the city. The question that we had was the use of the Hardy Plank board. You'll recall, Commissioner Simmons, a couple of years ago, we had the same issue with a business that had went ahead, tore down some brick, and just put this up. And it was a question at that point if this Hardy board complied with the ordinance. The commission at the time let it go because they had already put it in. But the feeling at that time, the commission felt that Hardy Plank board did not qualify.
Right.
And so that was one of the reasons that we brought it before Planning and Zoning before we brought it here. At the Planning and Zoning Commission, the owner had proposed breaking up some of the appearance of the exterior of the building because the Planning and Zoning Commission expressed some concern about the appearance of the building itself. And my understanding was they were going to bring back something to break up the appearance. But the question sort of for staff is, does the Hardy Plank siding qualify under the ordinance? Because it isn't directly allowed under the ordinance, but it's not, we didn't get that specific in restricting Hardy Plank siding. It is a cement siding. It does look like wood. Wood's permitted, concrete's permitted, but we didn't go into specific types of siding. So it's really a interpretation question whether you feel that it does qualify under the ordinance, and I can say affirmatively from the last commission, they felt it did not qualify.
Right now, I don't feel that this qualifies, I guess, so that's my opinion.
And all I wanted to point out with my comment was I'm a little concerned they're going to come back with, okay, here's wood, and move on and build it. And we may legally not be able to do much about that if I'm catching what John is saying. So that's kind of my caution to the commission. Some people are really good to work with, and then some people are, I just want to get it built, so.
I think we still control the letter of occupancy, though, at the end of the day as well. So there are ways, Tim, that we can, they will want to, just talk to them, I guess is all I'm saying.
Okay.
I just have a comment on
Please, Commissioner Olson.
the rest of the development around Cheyenne and 32nd Avenue, with the potential that's there, does this type of business meet the big picture idea and of economic development? Is that what we want to put down there? I don't know, that's something that Matt can speak on, or I hate to put him on the spot, but if it's within the big picture, then I'm okay with it. But if it's not, I don't want it to be another apartment complex that's sitting on veterans that we lose. It loses the intent of the big picture.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Matt Marshall, Director of Economic Development. It is true that to the north there's a more substantial development, higher value per square foot. On the south side, that's not represented down there. In our West Fargo Comprehensive Plan, we recognize that, how do you build a transition zone or increase the taxable value even on the south side, although there's buildings there, and so we are trying to achieve that. Being the business representative, I'd say all business is good to a degree, so I would never say that we don't want them. I want to accept everybody. However, I think if we can work with them and find a way to allow them to come in and still fit in with what we're trying to see long-term, not only on the north side of the road but the south side of the road, I think it would be better for all parties. They probably argue with me when they talk about their bottom line, but as a city, in order to achieve that vision, we're going to have to push a little bit.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Isn't it not my understanding that in order for you to be more specific on specific building materials, you just about have to declare an overlay district? Isn't that correct, Tim?
That's how we do it through our zoning ordinances, through our overlay districts.
And this is not in an overlay district, so thus we really only follow the ordinance with your...
No, this is in an overlay district, and this is what we're referring to. The overlay district has those standards, and this is not one of those standards. So, and I should say also, the applicant here did point out a couple of their properties in the area that didn't feel met, and we did find the Eagle Run Crossing gas station does not meet it. But they did, submitted plans at the time to have it actually covered in stucco, and somehow got a certificate of occupancy. I just caught it. I sent them a notification letter of the violation on Friday of last week, so. But I will be back in on that, but. So, I guess maybe we go back and talk to them. So this is upgrade from what they had proposed. They included some columns and included some windows. Before they didn't have that. It was just straight hardy board lap siding. So I think what I hear from the commission, and not to put words in your mouth, Commissioner Simmons, but maybe I go back and talk to them a little bit and try to get them to upgrade again a bit.
That would be my recommendation. Do that.
Please present it in a motion.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll make a motion to do that.
Is there a second, please?
Second.
And moved and seconded that directing Mr. Solberg to go back and review the development and the building materials at 425 32nd Avenue West, Dollar General. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Solberg. Number 8, review the developer's petition to add Wild's 11th edition improvements to sewer, water, storm, and street improvement district number 1305 via work change directive to the general contract and review engineer's opinion of estimated cost for additional improvements to sewer, water, storm, and street improvement district 1305 per petition request. Mr. Bullis.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Commissioners, again, my name is Jim Bullis, and I'm here on behalf of the developer of the Wilds. We currently have the Wilds 9th under construction. Dakota Underground was the low bidder on that project. We have kind of brought through this board the Wilds 11th edition, which is immediately adjacent to it. There is a lift station specifically in the Wilds 11th that'll serve both, I guess, the whole Wilds development when it's done. That lift station uses three-phase power, that if we finish up this development and come back later with an improvement request for the 11th, we're going to be digging up a bunch of stuff, as I understand it, and kind of going over this power again. This to us seems like a much more efficient way and a cheaper way to get these improvements in, rather than going back and just doing another project right next door. And that's why we're here tonight, to ask that the commission enlarge the prior improvement district by change order to accommodate that and other improvements.
Any questions from Mr. Bullis? Mr. Scott, or Mr.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. First thing I'd like to point out is that the Century Code does have some limitations in terms of ordering additional work. It is certainly well within our right to order additional work that can be done at the same price as long as the contractor is consenting to that. However, there is a threshold that additional work cannot exceed 20% of the original value of work that was already contracted for. So in doing some quick looking here, the overall project of the Wilds 9th Improvement District is over $5 million. The nature of the work that Mr. Bullis is requesting be added on is related to sanitary sewer, water main, and storm sewer installations. The value of the original contract for those improvements was about $2.7 million. So by the Century Code threshold, 20% of that would be $540,000, whereas I believe the estimate and the request for the change order is exceeding $1 million. So I guess my comment would be twofold. One, adding additional work is allowed, and the city has done that in previous projects. And two, there is a threshold to which the city can add that additional work, and that, like I said, it's 20% of the original value. So I don't have the exact numbers, but in rough numbers, we're talking about $500,000 would be our threshold.
And we're at 1.6, Jim, is that right here? Am I looking at the total change order cost, 1.6 million?
Yeah, and I guess I hadn't considered the possibility of this being by component. You know, whether it's has to be sewer as opposed to the whole contract amount, and that's what we were kind of looking at. And I don't know if if there's any if we have any guidance out of the Century Code in that regard or not.
So what Mr. Bullis is referencing is whether or not it's 20% of the original contract or 20% of the value of the work that is being added. And from my perspective, it's 20% threshold of the value of the work that is being added. So if we are adding the sewer, water, and storm sewer improvement portion, we go to and look at the original value of that, not the total contract price. If that's my interpretation, that's where John should probably comment on that as well. And if I am correct, and there is this $500,000 maximum value, I mean, that's still, question would still be, can we change order that portion onto this contract or not? So that, I imagine you're kind of going to subdivide this request into two components. One is, the request would be to add all of this $1.6 million, but if the threshold does exist, or if the threshold, my interpretation of the threshold is 20% of $2.7 million, would you revise your request then to add the $500,000?
First, I'm hoping his interpretation is incorrect. I want to add as much as we can. These are great pricing. We're trying to keep specials down, and we don't want to get this, and we want to get these improvements in the ground. To the extent that we can only get $540,000, then by golly, yes, I'll take $540,000. But you know, we look at it, we kind of leaned on the contractor to take last year's pricing essentially and apply it to either this fall or next spring work. And you know, I guess the component pricing that Dustin is talking about is not something I'd consider because we don't necessarily know what change orders are going to be. You know, there are oftentimes we've change ordered things that weren't even contemplated by a contract. Whether it's soil conditions or whatever, just to get a contract done. So I don't know that I would necessarily believe that if this were two contracts, one for underground improvements and a separate contract for surface improvements, I think Dustin would be 100% correct. He may still be correct. I'm not saying he's not.
So I think, Jim, first we have to find out what it is. Obviously we have, and I don't know if they can figure that out right now tonight anyway.
So,
Sean.
Yeah, so I had a chance to look at this really quickly. It's 20% of the total engineer's estimate for the project, and Dustin was telling me that it was about $5.5 million for the project. And just a little bit background, the 20% threshold is there to prevent, in a situation where you have an assessment district in which, here's a little different, it's greenfields, it's one developer, but the idea is that you don't want to have change orders constantly put in there and to way exceed the original value of the improvement district. Sort of a check to make sure that taxpayers aren't paying a whole bunch of extra money. Here you have one developer that's requesting it. You know, even if it exceeded the 20%, we might be able to enter into an agreement for a waiver.
Still looks like this is really close, so what is the percentage?
I'm going to defer the engineer on the math.
5.5 and this is 1.6, so.
Yeah, it's close.
It's, well, 20% of 5 million would be 1 million.
Yeah, 5.5 be 1.1, I guess.
Yeah, and this is 1.6, so it's $500,000 more. Correct?
I think
So
that's right.
it's still over the threshold is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, we can only do what we can do. If that's the law, I guess, right? Anybody?
Right, and that's, I guess I would like, the opportunity to, I guess, confirm the hard numbers, pull up what the engineer's estimate was from, back when we started the district, and then, I think it doesn't necessarily change the nature of the request, which would be, to order the additional work as a change order to this project, but not to exceed this 20% threshold. So whether or not the engineer's estimate that provided the numbers for the current request is accurate, I think the bottom line is the commission comfortable moving forward, adding 20% additional work?
Whatever that number is fine.
Whatever that threshold is.
But that number, again, I'm not, change orders, I've been here a long time, we've seen a lot of them. To me, at the end of the day, it's not the change order, it's what costs the residents, what the individual house costs. And if you're saying accurately that by doing this, you'll get that down because you're not going to basically do work twice, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, the assessments will go out cheaper than if we didn't do it. That's my understanding.
It shouldn't raise one homeowner's assessment by $1, I wouldn't think.
It should lower it, actually, if you're saying, well, it wouldn't lower it, it just wouldn't raise it by doubling the work. I get that, yeah. Is that accurate?
Yeah, what we don't know is if we were to competitively bid this, let's say we prepare a bid package for September, open bids,
Sure.
The bids could come in fairly high, much higher than what the current prices are, but they could also come in lower. That's the we don't know factor. What we have looked into is the prices that we do have with the current contract, Dakota Underground. Those are relatively competitive unit prices for that nature of work.
But what we do know is that they're going to do the work twice, basically. If we don't allow this, they're going to have to go back and dig it back up again, right? We do know that.
Right. We'll have to mobilize a new contractor, whether it's Dakota Underground. Whoever would competitively win the bid would now mobilize out there, so we know that that's an additional cost that wouldn't have to be incurred. Mr. Bullis alluded to, there's a power line out there that we might have to relocate or dig up again in the future, which would be inefficient and possibly an added $100,000 cost. So those are some numbers that we know would be included in the district if and when we created a district for the 11th edition. So we can say pretty comfortably that this is the best price moving forward. It's just a $1 million change order is it's a large change order.
Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, again, just so I get it right, at the end of the day, it's still got to get done.
Yes.
So the change order is just a variable in between. At the end of the day, it's still going to cost money. And hopefully it will save the taxpayers money, the citizens in that area, the residents, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we're fine with the change order for the landowner. We think it's
With all that being said, who's in charge of negotiating the change order dollar amount?
by statute. I mean, what we had to do, the contractor had to, if you wanted the work, had to match the existing unit pricing from last year.
Unit pricing, okay.
So we already had numbers.
So if I could suggest a possible way out of this is you would have a motion by the city commission to approve a change order of up to 20%, and then direct the engineer to go back and negotiate down to that 20% threshold. Keep in mind that 20% threshold is for construction costs. It doesn't include the soft costs that you've calculated in here. It would just be for construction and the contingency. What the 20%?
Does that work, Mr. Bullis?
Absolutely.
My thoughts exactly. If it's in September and October that we're talking about this, they're not about to take on other projects, so I would think that we would have the ability to negotiate at some point with this contractor, stay on task and for another $1 million worth of, potentially another $1 million worth of work. Just as long as I'm assured that, we're assured that there is a negotiation process in this.
We would not move forward if they decide to increase the unit prices. So every foot of sewer, water, and storm pipe that they put in will either be at the same unit price as we currently are contracted for, or we will not move forward with a change order. Because at that point, if they're asking for an increase, we may as well go and competitively bid this thing.
That makes sense.
All right. Any additional questions from Mr. Bullis? Mr. Scott or Mr. Shockley? What's the pleasure of the commission?
I'll make that motion, Mayor, that we do that.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we're reviewing the developer's petition to add Wild's 11 additional improvements to sewer, water, storm, and street improvements up to whatever the Sudbury Code allows, which is 20% of the original, and that engineering be instructed that if anything's over and above unit price, that we will further negotiate, or we will turn down that contractor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 9, review the Renaissance Zone application for Henco Properties. Sally? Ms. Ross?
Thank you, Commissioner President and Commissioners. The property up for consideration is located, there we go, excuse me, is located on active Renaissance Zone Block 21A, highlighted here, right on Main Avenue. Directly to the west of this, the same developer has another Renaissance Zone project as well. It is currently a vacant lot shown on this picture here, along with initial renderings that the developer gave us as well. This here is the site plan given to us. The building itself is estimated at $1.5 million. The current tax assessed value is $355,700 for the land, which the owner will continue paying taxes on. It will be a 10,184 square foot building of premium office space, and they do have significant landscaping plans as well due to it being located right on Main Avenue. The building will be able to accommodate multiple businesses due to having 4 separate entrances and appropriate parking as well. As shown in the valuation here, the incentive spans over 5 years. Each year, the abatement will be $21,324 for a total of $106,624 over those 5 years. The $5,057 in taxes from the land will continue to be paid by the developer as well. The EDAC board did recommend approval for this project at their August 1st meeting, and I am available for questions that you may have as well. Thank you.
For the public, would you please just in rough terms tell us where this is tell the public where this is on Main Avenue?
Oh, yes, of course, sorry. As you said, it's located right on Main Avenue. Just for reference of location, to the west is the Auto Trans building, and then Dave's Tire. To the east is American Welding, I believe. So,
thank you, Ms. Ross. Are there any questions of Ms. Wall?
I'll make a motion, Mayor, to approve.
And moved by Commissioner Simmons to approve the Renaissance Zone application for Henco Properties on Main Avenue. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Commissioner Jurdovic. Been moved and seconded to approve the Renaissance Zone application for Henco Properties on Main Avenue. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. A reminder, item 10 was moved to the consent agenda, so now we are on item number 11. Review the West Fargo events contract. The Administrator, Tina Fisk.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. At this time, I had sent out, it went out in the packet as well, the current agreement with West Fargo Events that would allow them to manage and schedule the event space up at the Cheyenne Plaza and then eventually at Cheyenne 32. There were some conversations and some changes made. All those are included in here. Currently, this is a 6-month contract that we would renegotiate the terms and the payments prior to the end of that 6-month period. And all other items have been included in here that were requested as changes. At this time, upon review of staff and discussion, I would request your approval of the contract and to be able to enter into this agreement.
Would you share with the public, Tina, if there's a term on this contract for how long it runs?
The term of this contract is 6 months. The full term of the contract could be extended to December of 2019, but we're required to negotiate prior to the ending of the first 6 months.
Does this include the space down on South 17th?
Yes, it does.
Again, for the public knowledge,
Yep,
I just wanted...
yep, exactly. And they will hire someone to manage the space, to work on events in the location, to get sponsorships, and it'll all be managed by the West Fargo Events Board, of which the city has 2 representatives on.
There. Tina, I guess I wasn't aware of why I don't recall, why the 6 months?
Because currently what we wanted to do was give them the opportunity to show us what they can do. They had requested a higher fee, and we said we wanted to see what they could do in the first 6 months, and then we would renegotiate so we can adjust, because then by then there'll be more information on whether Cheyenne 32 is coming on, when it's coming on, and we can bring that all into the package in greater detail, what's being provided.
I'm fine with that. It just doesn't seem like 6 months. That's not really giving them, I guess, an opportunity to show us a year cycle, or it gets us through the winter time, and that's it.
It was that amount of time that I negotiated with Todd Burning and
If they're okay with it, I'm
his
totally
West Fargo
fine with it.
Events
Yeah.
staff.
Okay.
It still has to go to the West Fargo Events Board for approval, but at this point he was comfortable with that because he felt he could show the value that they can provide with
Okay.
that.
Good enough. Thank you.
Mr. Thorstead.
Just for informational purposes, what's the composition of the board? You mentioned we got 2 city representatives. Who else is on that board? Or who else would
Correct
be?
me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 2 city commissioners, 2 park, 2 school, and then they have West Fargo Events staff that sits on there as well. I don't know if they're voting
They're not on the
members.
board, though, I don't think.
And then I think, isn't there 2 at large? And one is Brian Schultz?
Yep, Brian Schultz is one.
Yep, and,
And the other one, I don't think we haven't had a meeting because we've been waiting for this, but I don't think we picked.
8-person board?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any additional questions of Tina? It's a pleasure.
Make a motion to approve.
Commissioner Thorstead moves to approve the West Fargo Events contract. Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Olson. Been moved and seconded to accept the West Fargo Events contracted as presented to us. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you all very
you.
much.
Thank you. John, a little advice on the agenda, please.
Members of the West Fargo City Commission, up next we have an executive session. The Century Code allows a governing body to go into executive session to develop offers and negotiating strategy regarding potential claims or other issues or the purchase of real estate. Here we really have a couple of issues going on that would qualify. First of all, we're trying to put together final offers for some purchase of easements. Also, I think based upon last commission's meeting, I think litigation is likely, so I feel very comfortable that we squarely fall within the parameters of the executive session. You'll recall that this is for a district that was created pursuant to Chapter 402201, which is the Improvement District section, which allows for the creation of improvement districts that will ultimately be assessed. I did want to correct one misstatement that may have been made by different people at the last commission meeting. The reason why the letter went out to the commissioner or to the residents talking about no assessments is, as you heard earlier tonight, we don't assess property that's outside the city limits. The assessment district is for property within city limits. It still complies with the same improvement district statute. And if there's benefits to property that's outside of city limits, there's a procedure, as I noted before, where we hold those assessments out till the property's annexed in the future. And that's part of this whole improvement district discussion, but we would need a motion to go into executive session. I would just suggest approving the resolution as it states on the agenda. You need a motion, a second, vote in favor of it, and then we'll go into the other room, discuss it, and we should be back in 10 or 15 minutes.
Commissioners,
I'll make a motion to go into executive session.
is there a second, please? Second. And moved and seconded that the West Fargo Commission go into executive session. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We will reconvene in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Tina, do you have a... What? Oh, yeah. Yes. Don't quote me.
Pretty much right now, Roxanne.
Yeah. Because of the paragraph. I understand what you do, whatever that means. They pay tax. They come together. Sure, yeah. I don't think it'll get very far with proposals. Yeah. Here now. Every year. They have to come back, they have to resolve it. Well, they got a mess over in front of your house, so you gotta get that. Yeah, well, that's still more. Well, yeah. They end up getting work every time they have. It's the difference between day and night sports. guys used to talk about it, and a lot of hay. I know you were
So we really don't have much left, do we? Yeah, I think so too. We gotta.
Left on the agenda.
Just the minister's report, please.
Oh, just the reports.
Need to probably wait.
West Fargo Commission meeting of August 20th will reconvene. The next order of business is resolutions of just compensation for sewer improvement project number 1308. Mr. Shockley.
Thank you, Mr. Commission President. Before you have the resolutions of just compensation offer to purchase that we have prepared for you based upon the appraised value and some additional compensation as directed by the City Commission. We can approve them all with one resolution. They'll then be sent out, those final offers to purchase will be sent out to the landowners in accordance with the direction given by the City Commission. And we just need a motion and a second to approve them, and then the staff will take care of the rest.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Are there any additional questions from the Commission to Mr. Shockley?
Oh, and just for the record, the appraisals are available, were made available to the Commission.
What is the pleasure of the Commission?
Make a motion to approve.
Motion made by Commissioner Simmons for a resolution of just compensation for sewer improvement project number 1308. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Jurdeve. It's been moved and seconded to accept the just compensation for sewer improvement project number 1308 as presented to the Commission. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next order of business is the City Administrator's Report. Tina. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. I handed you a sheet. I know I had mentioned this too when we were talking about the budget. This is an example of what each person within Cass County is going to receive for an estimate of their taxes, notifying them also of the different hearing schedule dates and so on. and so on and so forth. I wanted you to just get an idea because everybody will be getting one, and the way it's set up with the increase and notice on the side, it gets confusing for people. But this is just an example of what they'll get, and I just wanted you to be aware. This isn't using our current levies or correct levies. This is just an example based, I believe, on last year's. So just something for you to look at, and if you have questions, let me know. One other thing. Bertie had mentioned to you about the committee he's on with the City of Fargo for special assessments, but he has also been asked to sit on the League's Legislative Advisory Group. So he will be the West Fargo representative on that group as well. So that will be very good for the community. The only other thing I have is to let you know that John Shockley, Ma'am Marshall, and I will be going to Minot on Wednesday. They're having a downtown development discussion, conversation, and with all the development that was created through Matt and John and the P3 and some of the creative ways we found to make that work. They've invited them down there to present to them on how we were able to be successful because they've got a lot of successful things going on down there as well. So we'll gather information from them and they'll get some from us. So other than that, I do not have anything else for you this evening unless you have questions for me.
Any questions for Tina?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any correspondence? No correspondence. Before we adjourn, I'd like to thank Carolyn for sitting in this evening, for Courtney, keeping us on the straight and narrow up here, because God knows we need it. Is there anything for the good of the order from the commissioners? Anybody? Motion, please.
We're ready to go home, Mayor. Make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Have a great evening.